Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in, and welcome to the ongoing series Talking Dance, sponsored by the Steps Beyond Foundation. I'm Allen Maniker, Foundation Board Chair, and I'll be your host and moderator. This series continues to present an exciting lineup of dance artists who will be sharing their stories and insights with you. They range from across the dance spectrum. The full lineup and information can be found at stepsbeyond, that's one word, .org. There is also a place there to make a suggested donation, should you be so inclined. And we do hope you will be so inclined so that we can continue to bring you quality programming. Also, please note that you may enter your comments and questions in the chat, and we'll make every effort to answer all questions asked. And if you'd like to let us know where in the world you're located and listening in from, we would love to know. Tonight, we are talking about, and I'm going to share my screen here. We are talking about preserving our legacy. And we have on hand two of the most qualified people to do so, Wendy Perron and Norton Owen. Wendy is a dancer, choreographer, teacher, and writer. Beside performing with many independent choreographers, she was a member of the Trisha Brown Company in the 1970s. She also maintained her own company for which she choreographed more than 40 works. Currently, she teaches dance history at Juilliard and a graduate seminar at NYU Tisch School of the Arts, and has also taught at Bennington College, SUNY Purchase, Princeton, Rutgers, and the Five College Dance Department. Since the 1970s, she has contributed reviews and features to The Village Voice, The New York Times, Ballet Review, and Dance Magazine. In 2013, her book, Through the Eyes of a Dancer, was published. Her most recent book is The Grand Union, Accidental Anarchists of Downtown Dance, 1970 to 1976. From 2004 to 2013, she served as editor-in-chief of Dance Magazine and is now editor-at-large. We're delighted she is joining us today. Norton Owen is a curator, writer, and archivist with nearly 50 years of professional experience in dance. Founded in 1931, Jacob's Pillow is a treasured 220-acre National Historic Landmark and home to America's longest-running international dance festival. Norton Owen currently serves as the director of preservation and has been associated with Jacob's Pillow since 1976. He oversees all programs concerning dance documentation, exhibitions, and archival resources, while also coordinating pillow talks, pre- and post-show lectures, and film programs. He was the longtime director of the Limon Institute, chair of the Dance Heritage Coalition, and resident curator of the National Museum of Dance, while he is currently president of the O'Donnell Green Music and Dance Foundation. As curator of the award-winning online site known as Jacob's Pillow Dance Interactive, Norton seeks to make the Pillow's archival holdings widely available. Among other accolades, he received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Martha Hill Dance Fund in 2017, a Dance Films Association Award, the Jose Limon Dance Foundation Award, and the Theater Library Association Award. We are delighted to welcome him as well tonight. So, hello, Norton.
Hi.
Hello, Wendy. So
Hi.
wonderful to have you both here with us tonight. Looks like, Norton, you're up at the Pillow.
I am indeed.
Yeah.
I'm in the archives in the Norton Owen reading room.
Wow. So it's Norton Owen coming from the Norton Owen reading room.
I'm afraid so.
I have to say, I remember when that reading room was just one shelf of books, and it has expanded to the grand Norton Owen reading room where dancers and audience people can come and watch something from long ago. It's really a great way to do legacy.
That's fantastic. So today's broadcast is preserving our legacy. And I guess we should begin by saying, well, what do we mean by legacy? You want to kick it off, Wendy? What do we mean by it?
Well, I think it's a lot of things. Automatically I think, well, it's when dances are reconstructed and then you see that dance years later. But so many times a dance after 30 years or 50 years the time has changed and the dance doesn't mean the same thing as it did. But I have to say that recently I saw the Graham Company do Chronicle from 1936 and the Lamone Company do Doris Humphrey's Air for the G String from 1934, which has not been done in a long time. And the Chronicle has been done, and we're now familiar with this mass of ferocious women crossing the stage. But the Doris Humphrey piece we haven't seen in a long time, and it really gave me a fresh understanding of the sort of dignity, the gentle architecture of her work, the way there'd be a group in a circle, but they would break apart. It didn't seem dated. It seemed like it was bringing us something fresh. So in those two instances, I thought that it really was bringing back a legacy to reconstruct those dances. But I think, as you were hinting in another question, there are many ways to have legacy. So I'll hand it over to Norton, and I might have more to say after that.
Because Norton, I mean, you're not really, you're enormously important in preserving legacy, but you're not reconstructing dances at all.
Well, I will say, sometimes we get involved in that as well. But when I think of legacy in a broader sense, I think about how baked into the dance field it is in a way. I mean, thinking about just the daily regimen of a dance class and how that connects students with whatever background their teacher has, and which, depending on the teacher, can be more or less overt, but it often comes very clearly into the classroom with a teacher sharing something, either a combination that they knew from a mentor or an anecdote or something else, so that it can be a part of dancers' daily lives in a sense. And
I like to give an assignment where I teach dance history at Juilliard. Like, what's your lineage? Talk to your teacher about that person's teacher, to just go back a couple of generations. And they always feel more connected to the dance field when they do that.
Right.
Well, but see, that's very interesting, because that surprises me about the younger generation, because from my perspective at Juilliard, we automatically knew who, we knew that Kazuko came from Martha Graham, that came from Denishon, and that Danny Lewis came from Jose, that came from Doris, Doris Humphrey. So do you think to a certain extent that the idea of lineage and legacy is of less emphasis or less importance to the generation today?
I think it changes with the field. Like, for instance, in tap dance, the tap people are always talking about their ancestors. They don't lose that lineage at all. If you look at Alvin Ailey doing Revelations all the time, they're so connected to their lineage. You walk into the Alvin Ailey building and you see pictures of Alvin Ailey and Judith Jamison. There are ways that people really stay connected to their lineage. So I think it depends on what subgenre of dance you're talking about.
Well, that's true, but I think it then behooves those of us who are able to pass things along to make sure that we are passing on what we know to future generations. And so, I think that anything that we can do to connect younger people with their dance ancestry, the better off we are. I mean, I think one factor, Alan, when you talk about maybe the way things used to be, the connections to our dance ancestors were closer. I mean, we knowing that contemporary dance in our country anyway is so relatively young, and the people that, well, I'd say really that all of us were studying with in the 60s or 70s were people who had direct lineage to the beginnings of dance in this country. That's no longer possible.
Right, like Alan. I mean, Alan, you were studying with, who did you study with at Juilliard?
Well, Kazuko Hirabayashi and Danny Lewis and, and Anna Sokolow choreographed on us, and, but you're absolutely right. So there's at least 2 or 3 more generations beyond from when I was doing this.
Right. And I think there's a greater diversity of backgrounds at this point in time too, that not everybody has come through the traditional, at one point you could have said quite rightly that almost anybody working in contemporary dance in the US could trace their roots back to Denishawn in some way, whether it was through Martha Graham or through Doris Humphrey, Jose Limon, Jack Cole, various other people that would lead back there. And, there are other strains that we recognize at this point, and, just every bit as valid, but maybe not as recognizable as a family tree in the way that it used to be.
I know that, sorry, go ahead, Wendy.
Well, if you talk about hip hop, which is only about 50 years old, everyone who's doing hip hop now could conceivably trace back to, Mr. Wiggles or whoever was doing hip hop in the Bronx, in the 70s or 80s. So that's that's like the way modern dance was 50 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But so we have legacy in a broader sense, but it's also a living legacy that lives in the bodies of current dancers. And there's a lot of various trusts now. There's the Balanchine Trust, the Cunningham Trust, Paul Taylor. Do you have a sense, are they doing a good job at preserving these legacies? Or do you have any suggestions? Are there maybe better ways, more improved ways to do so?
Norton, do you want to jump in?
Well, I mean, sure, one can always quibble, but I think that for the most part, if you recognize that what any of these institutions that you mentioned that are charged with carrying their legacy on, they are all really serious about doing that and are working as hard as they can to make sure that happens, each in their own way, which I think is kind of wonderful, really, that there's no one blueprint to do that. The way that you might teach a Cunningham dance, for instance, or receive the information that allows you to do that might be very different than the way that you set about teaching a Graham dance. And so it's really appropriate that these different strains are under the supervision of that particular discipline, that particular strain, that genre that they're working on. But I think anybody that is actively doing it in that way is to be applauded and supported. I think the great tragedy may be too strong a word, but it's unfortunate that not every legacy has the mechanisms to keep that going. And so that's where it becomes more of a challenge. If Wendy, you were talking about the Humphrey work before, and there's yes, the Limon Company is a receptacle for her work, and then there's also, her works were documented, and many of them were notated there at the Dance Notation Bureau. But there isn't the same kind of mechanism. There's not a Doris Humphrey performing company that's all the time touring. Or a Charles Weidman company, or a Nikolai Lewis company at this point. So oftentimes it's having a living tradition in the way that the Graham Company continues on, and the way the Limon Company continues on, that those become the best repositories, because for the work to truly live, it needs to be danced, and not just seen on film.
So can I interject something here before you
Sure.
chime in, Wendy? It seemed to me that the cornerstone of preservation and reconstruction was a combination of lava notation and film. And with a shout out of our recently departed and much beloved Ann Hutchinson guest. Is that still the case? Are those still the two cornerstones for reconstructing works from the past, film and lava notation?
Well, I mean, this sort of goes into what I was going to talk about, a couple of different ways of handling legacy. The Cunningham Company is no longer happening, but the Cunningham Foundation is very strong. Lava notation is not a big part of what they do. Film is in some ways, but also teaching classes on Instagram and having other companies do the work. I think American Ballet Theater still does the duets thing, and different. Last year there was 100 solos. There are innovative ways to preserve the legacy that don't necessarily have to do with the company. And I think another one of those ways is like the Graham Company doing the Lamentation Variations, where they have the film of the 1930 Lamentation that Martha Graham did as a solo, and then they ask choreographers to extend it. I think that's another innovative way of having legacy. And I'll mention one third way is David Gordon, and this, the Library for the Performing Arts was a repository of this. He did a big exhibit of all his work, but now it's online, the David Gordon Archivology, which you can find at David Gordon NYC. It's not lava notation. It's not really film. There might be a few videos online, but it's mostly David Gordon's talking about himself decade by decade. Now that David Gordon has passed, it's like so valuable. And also to know that he did it himself. These are his own words, his own pictures, a conglomeration of personal and professional life, a very personal way to have legacy. And I think everyone's doing it differently. Paul Taylor did the Paul Taylor American Modern Dance, where he's inviting other companies and other choreographers. Stephen Petronio is doing Bloodlines, where he's honoring some of the choreographers that he looked up to. So I would say maybe no, those two things are no longer the cornerstones. I think there are a lot of innovative ways to try to hold on to the legacy of a particular artist.
Well, would you say, are there some artists that were better at preserving their legacy than others?
Well, sure. I mean, there's always the I think part of it really stems from whether the artists themselves wants it to carry on in some way, and how much they invest. I don't mean just in money, but how much they invest in terms of their own energy or impetus in terms of making sure that their work continues. So yeah, and I think a lot of creative artists really do have that urge, and others really could care less, and so they need help from other people to make sure that oftentimes creative people are just thinking about what they can create next, and they're not,
Right.
They don't want to spend their time rehashing older things. But it's all part of the picture, really.
Yeah.
And they need to have, ideally some kind of support system around them to make that happen.
I want to give an example of the difference of, this question you're talking about. A few years ago, I co-curated an exhibit called Radical Bodies. You might see this backward, I don't know, but it was about Anna Halprin, Simone Forti, and Yvonne Rainer. And we found in our research that Anna Halprin and Yvonne Rainer kept really good records. They knew where the photographs were. They were taken care of. You could find the photographs easily. Whereas Simone Forti, it was really hard to find photographs or any tracings of what she'd done. Mm-hmm. And it's partly because Simone didn't think of herself as an important figure in dance history or art history. Now the Museum of Modern Art has acquired some of her conceptual pieces. But she was going here, going there, living on communes. She didn't hold tight or conceive of herself in that way. So I think it is, I agree with Norton, it's just really different with different artists.
Well, so are you saying that, so the question I have in mind is, why are some artists remembered and others are not? And, Wendy, you have your wonderful series, Unsung Heroes of Dance History. So is it incumbent upon the artist to be remembered in some ways, in that they keep records of their work, they, feel that it's of a value, so they keep it instead of thinking that they're not really important, so they don't keep it? Is that factor into who's remembered and who's not?
Well, it certainly factors into it. I think that the more that an artist can do themselves to to give a next generation something that they can study or learn from, so much the better. And one of the examples that I have of that, of really in the most stripped down way, is Jose Limon himself was his unpublished memoirs, which were finally did come out 25 years ago or so, but that was something that he was just working on a legal pad with a pencil, and if he had not written those memories down, well, we just wouldn't have that incredible resource. So it doesn't necessarily have to come from somebody being well funded or having incredible resources. They can use whatever resources they have, but having the desire, I think, to do it, and taking the time. It obviously is time intensive for anybody, no matter what medium you're working in, to record things, to pass them on in some way takes a lot of initiative.
Norton, does your archive up there have that legal pad of Jose's?
No, it's at the New York Public Library.
Uh-huh.
But it does exist.
Now that we've mentioned the New York Public Library, I think we have to say that the Jerome Robbins Dance Division is just crucial to all of this. And that if you want to do any research or find things, and I've made a list of resources, and one of the resources I found online, like during the pandemic, where you don't have to go anywhere, this is the library, and that's the reading room at the Pillow. But walking into that library, and it was closed for the pandemic, but it did have things online. For instance, the Oral History Project. There were certain people that were, there were hundreds of dance artists who were interviewed for the Jerome Robbins Dance Division Oral History Project. Actually, it's called something else, like the Project for Sound and Fury or something. I don't know. But there are people like Mary Hinkson, Valerie Bettis, Isamu Noguchi, who you can just go online and listen to. You don't have to walk into the library here. So the Oral History Project has all these hundreds of people, and then there are a few of them that you can actually link to and hear their voice from your home.
Wow. Can I tell one of my amusing anecdotes with the Library for the Performing Arts?
Please.
Sure.
So, whenever we performed at Juilliard, it was filmed, sent over copyrighted, sent over to the library, and the library, of course, is part of the Library of Congress. And when I skipped forward about 30 years and I published a neurosurgical textbook, my secretary called into my office and said, the Library of Congress is on the phone. They want to talk to you. And I said, well, okay. So she introduced herself, very nice lady, and she said, Dr. Maniker, we are having a problem cataloging your book because there's apparently a dancer with the exact same name as yours. And I said, well, that's because it's me. And so we went from there. So that was very funny. I've
You-
always loved that.
Yeah, you've lived a double life.
Right. So Wendy, you've talked about now a resource, and I wanted to put this up for everyone to see. Wendy has very kindly compiled a list of resources for anybody that's interested. And
Norton
you
helped.
want to speak about it, Wendy?
Yeah, Norton helped too. I just, because basically in the pandemic, I was writing this series, Unsung Heroes of Dance History, because there are people in dance history that do get sort of forgotten. They didn't have the resources, or they didn't have the people around them to make sure that they were remembered. Maybe an exception to that is Sybil Shearer, who's one of the 10 people I profiled, but she does have an institute in Chicago. But I just got interested in who is saving these resources and where you can go. And there are certain libraries, there are other resources. So I have a list of, I don't know, there's like 30 resources on there. And maybe the first 5 are Jacob's Pillow, because Norton has not only preserved legacy, but Norton has pushed the boundaries of how you save legacy with his playlists and things like that. So I just wanted everyone to know this, because they don't cost any money. You just go to these sites and you just see a lot of information.
Well, there is no doubt that, you know, the resources that are available to people today are so far beyond what has been in the past, partly because of all that's available online. But you know, that shouldn't take away from the importance for people, if they're able, to certainly go to archives. And there's so much else that's available there, whether it's the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts, or the Library of Congress, or Jacob's Pillow, or many other places that you can go to. But I think, you know, one of the things that we are certainly aware of here at the Pillow is that not everybody can get to Beckett, Massachusetts that easily. And so we are trying to make things available online, as well as, you know, to supplement what people can see when they come here, and also to draw more attention to the resources that are available here on site. But you know, the riches that are available, as Wendy points out, you know, the oral history collection, but so the New York Public Library also has a digital collection, you know, a digital archive of images that are available online. There's so many things that can be accessed from home at this point.
Just to mention to everyone that if you look in the comments, we have posted that link to the resource list that we've been speaking of. Norton, tell us for a moment, when you first arrived at the Pillow, was there an archive? What were you confronted with? Was it with a pile of boxes?
Yeah, when I first came, I did not come as the archivist. You know, that happened quite a bit later. But yeah, I came here originally as a dancer and was really intrigued by the Pillow's history, and it always spoke to me. And in the early days, of course, it was surrounding me by the people who were here. I mean, Jess Meeker, who was Ted Shawn's accompanist and composer starting in 1933, was still playing for classes up until the late 90s. And so, you know, he was part of our, you know, part of the landscape here, and somebody that I could just have a conversation with, which was just magical to me, that this wasn't just something that you could read about in a book. It was actually something that you could talk to somebody about. And
Barton Muma was around.
That's right.
Jane Sherman.
Yeah. You know, Jane Sherman, who was a Denishon dancer and a very good friend of mine, and lived over 100 years old. And because she was writing about the Denishon things that she remembered and trying to keep that alive, that was a big part of the landscape as well. But I think to answer your question, Alan, about what existed here, certainly none of this did. This has all come about later, and it's really been built very incrementally, step by step, as we have seen what it is that people are interested in, and then how we can better make those things that we have available to people. And it has been a passion project. Is something that very much sprang from my own belief that this was part of the Pillows legacy that needed to be preserved, but also needed to be shared. It's one thing to make sure that you're keeping it, but how are we sharing it? How are we making it visible to people? And I think we are lucky to have a real platform here where people coming into this space now, and we're located right next to the box office. So we get a lot of people coming in here, not because they are thinking that they're going to go visit a dance archive, but just because they're coming to a performance, and this is part of the package. And
But so Norton,
yeah.
you bring up another important point, because legacy really does include, if you will, memorabilia
Oh,
and ephemera. And I remember when the last time I was up there and you showed me some items that belonged to Miss Ruth. I mean, I nearly levitated out of the roof. I just thought that was the most wonderful, amazing things I had ever seen. So
yeah. Well,
I'm kind of curious, over the course of the years, how does one accumulate those kinds of things? Where are they found? Is it mostly donations?
well,
Actually, Miss Ruths are at Adelphi University. That's
well,
where,
there's some things at
oh,
Adelphi,
okay.
but there's quite a bit here. I mean, of course, we're greatly helped in this by the fact that Ted Shawn and Ruth St. Dennis documented a lot and threw away very little. So there was a lot that was actually kept, and we did a big
That
exhibit.
exhibit.
Yeah,
That exhibit, Dance We Must, or something?
Yeah, and in 2018, we did an exhibit in collaboration with the Williams College Museum of Art that showed a lot of the costumes that we have in our collection. And there's a book coming out later this year that documents that exhibit, which I think many people will find to be really revelatory in all that is there. I mean, the exhibit was a big a big draw, but of course it was in Williamstown, and it was just over the course of several months. Not everybody was able to get there and see it, although it was covered in the New York Times very fully. But yeah, artifacts for sure are part of it. And another thing that I think has expanded my idea of what is legacy is all the contextual kind of information that surrounds a dance. So it's not just a dance, but also what was the choreographer thinking, and what were they trying to do, and who were the people that they were working with, and what was their perspective. And so having all of these kinds of resources is a big part of the documentation that we're doing here now, mostly because when we look back to what had been kept from earlier generations, we weren't seeing this. And that was something that people wanted. They would say, well, like, what was Ted Shawn thinking in the 1930s when he had his company of men dancers? And, we have some resources, of course, but we don't have any, or very, very little, I should say, of spoken word or films of Ted Shawn speaking about what he was trying to do at that period in his life. So we're doing our best to make sure that those kinds of records exist for today's artists, and that will mean for tomorrow's scholars and historians that they'll have a much easier time, I think, of piecing together what might have been happening at this point in time.
Well, talking about scholars, I just want to say, so this leads to, now there's Ted Shawn wrote a lot of books himself, but the recent book on Ted Shawn by Paul, what's his last name?
Scolari.
Paul Scolari took a lot of information and new ways to look at it. So the context that he gave was a more current context about how does one look at these dances of other cultures? Was there appropriation, which even the word appropriation didn't exist at that time, but how do we look at it today? And Norton, what I think you did that was great was when you brought the exhibit back to the Pillow, you had several people write their context things of what they thought he was doing. So all of these legacies that seem like clear at the time, they become more complicated as time goes by.
Now, it's very interesting because in the question, in the chat, there's a question from Catherine Tarosi, who in some ways is the ultimate person of preserving legacy. And she wanted to know, is there an international dance archive?
Well, I mean, I would say in some senses, I feel like we are an international dance archive because, of course, all of the companies who perform here at the Pillow, I mean, that's what we're preserving at this point is, I mean, talked a lot about Ted Shawn and he did start the place. And of course, we do look at him, but we also are documenting all of the companies who come here. And, this summer, for instance, we have Black Grace coming from New Zealand. And the Pillow was the site of their U.S. debut in 2004. So, and there was a wonderful film done about them, which we're going to show this summer as a Pillow Talk called From Cannons Creek to Jacob's Pillow. And the wonderful thing about this film is it really shows, it's the only instance like this that I know, but a film crew from New Zealand Television was with the company in New Zealand prior to them coming here, but being able to sort of document their excitement about going to America and what they were going to do and how they were, getting their repertory together to bring it here. So, in that, I mean, that's just one example, but I would
imagine, Norton, there must be, I'm sure in London, the Royal Ballet, in Paris, the Paris Opera, and, the Bolshoi and the Mariinsky all have their own archives as well, don't they?
Yeah. And I'll just mention a few places that are really international in a way. The Dance Library of Israel is very old, it's I think next to our dance division, our library, it's probably the largest. In Bremen, in Germany, there's a center of dance films. I was just thinking of another one.
Are these on your list, Wendy?
No, they're not on my list. My list is more New York centered. In St. Petersburg at the Vaganova Institute, there's you know what? I'm wrong. I think it's the Bolshoi. There's like a museum with a lot of relics. That they really look at those things. So, yeah, and I'm sure the Royal Ballet has their own archives and all of that. I mean, you can probably find those things online, but the ones that I mentioned are more open, not just one company.
And do we know, are those archives that scholars can go into with the proper permissions?
Yeah, but I don't know what's online. I mean, I haven't researched the Royal Ballet, so I don't know what's actually online. I'm sure, like Marina Hars is doing a book on Ratmansky. I'm sure she's been to Russia and looked at those archives.
Mm-hmm.
There was a comment here from Barry Raffle saying, and I hope I don't butcher the name, Valentina Umansky. She says was my first dance teacher in Miss Ruth's building on Old Cahuenga Boulevard.
That's
she
right.
was the one who kept all the items, and they were there when I studied with her.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty amazing.
Well, yeah, and it's also a reminder that so much really depends on, well, I hesitate to say real estate, but to some degree that is true. part of what she's remembering from Amansky was that, to be in the building that Ruth St. Denis lived in and worked in, and where some of those things still carried on, is just magical. And, in many ways, I feel like that's what we have here. Jacob's Pillow has been in the same site since the 30s. And, that's very powerful. And it's something that unfortunately in New York you see less of, because things are so itinerant. And oftentimes, even if there is a collection that's been kept, it's not in the same place that it was. So you don't have that same synergy of place and history as you do in certain places.
Yeah.
I know,
actually.
I just want to say, I knew from Pauline Kohner's autobiography that Michel Fokine taught ballet at 4 Riverside Drive. So I actually went to 4 Riverside Drive. I thought there'd be a plaque or something. The number 4 isn't even there. There's a 2 Riverside Drive and a 6, but number 4 is like, it's not there. So yeah, these things disappear. I want to say something about photographs, because, just like at the Vaganova Institute, there'll be a picture of Vaganova. You have these pictures of Ted Shawn and St. Ruth there. Mm-hmm. At Steps, you walk in and there's pictures of Anne Reinking and Carmen de Lavalade and Desmond Richardson. Every studio has pictures, and I think photography is a very important way that we preserve our legacy and enrich our legacy.
Janice Brenner mentioned in the chat the Stockholm Dance Museum.
That's right.
And I will say, so from my Juilliard days, my dear friend Anne Crosset heads Company B at the Royal Danish Ballet. And when I visited Copenhagen, she took me up to Bournonville's studio, and there's a mirror door that opens where he would watch from the rafters. And she took me there, and it's giving me chills right now. Yeah. I'm there where Bournonville would watch the stage from up in the rafters. It was really quite extraordinary. Mm-hmm. Marianne Schultz asks, is the National Dance Museum in Saratoga Springs still operating and accessible? They hold many costumes and ephemera.
Yeah, it is currently closed. It has been recently taken over by the Saratoga Performing Arts Center, which actually used to own it, and then it spun off on its own, and now it's been subsumed back into SPAC, and it is not currently open, and it is not clear what will be happening with it.
So let's shift for a minute, because we did want to talk a little bit about improvisation. And is there, how do we preserve that legacy? Because certainly improvisation has been something, a tool that many important choreographers have used and utilized.
Yeah, I think it's used as a tool in choreography, and very rarely it's also used as a performance form. And very rarely does it work that way. But this is what my latest book is about the Grand Union, that was an incredible improvisation group. And I'll just show you the book cover. This is the book that I wrote. It was, Wesleyan University Press. And I wrote it because I just absolutely loved the group in the 70s. And it wasn't chronicled anywhere. No one was writing books about it. And I had a kind of dilemma about how to present the material that I found, which was, some of it was videotaped. Improvisation is a form that doesn't want to be videotaped. It doesn't want to be kept. It wants to be just done, and that's it. But they did videotape a bunch of performances in 1972. This involved Yvonne Rainer, Steve Paxton, Trisha Brown, David Gordon, Barbara Dilley, and Douglas Dunn, and Nancy Lewis. And it was an extraordinary synergy, an extraordinary, as I say in the title, really anarchistic group. And I think some of them didn't like the idea of it being written about, sort of set in stone that way. And I watched hours of these improvisations on video, and then sort of formed a narrative around them, because a lot of them was talking and also dancing. But I also tried to give an idea of what their thoughts were, kind of like what you were saying, Norton. What was Ted Shawn thinking?
Mm-hmm.
What was Trisha thinking? What was David Gordon thinking when he had his arms up like this and then decided, oh, I'll be a surgeon? Alan, you would appreciate that part where he had his arms up and it was like, okay, now I'm a surgeon. And instead of using a scalpel, he used his teeth. So that's sort of the spur of the moment kind of playful thing that would happen at Grand Union. So I did, and like all of dance writing, you try to describe it in words without killing it, without nailing it to the wall, but keep it open, so that people can read it and sort of imagine themselves. But I think improvisation is sort of the epitome of dance in that it happens and then it's gone. It's not like a painting that's on a tangible canvas that you can look at 10 or 50 years later.
Yeah, well, in the instances that you're talking about, and you mentioning that you watched hours of footage, that again speaks to the importance of documenting it, and of course that's an instance where, oftentimes we think about a kind of binary of like, oh, notation as one way or video as another way. Well, you wouldn't be notating something that was improvised. I'm not quite sure how you would do that, although there probably is a way. But just to have a record of it that then somebody can look at afterwards and get some sense of what was done. Now, because it is so relatively inexpensive to to document things on video and have that live on, then it is possible to, for, as Wendy was talking about, to be able to review what had been done, even if it was improvised.
Right. Well, but can I also ask then? There has to be a component in that's considered the oral tradition. So Indian classical dance, that, to my understanding, is mostly an oral tradition, and it's done pretty well for about 1,000 years.
It has, but then there was Chandralekha who changed that tradition and opened up what classical Indian dance was in terms of spatially, and she had a feminist point of view. So it's preserved, but it's changed, and I think that's why legacy is interesting, because it's not necessarily set in stone, that you can change it. And just like I was saying about Ted Shawn, we look at it differently now, or it spurs a different discussion now than it did at the time.
So you're saying legacy is a bit of a living thing, that it's mutable over time?
Yes, I think of dance history as being something that changes over time, and legacy changes over time.
So give us an example, let's say, of Ted Shawn and what might have been an opinion or a legacy 50 years ago versus now.
Well, let's just look at the Ted Shawn and the Men Dancers. What did it mean at that time for men dancers to go around the country? What would it mean now? So I'll let Norton take that.
Yeah, well, I was also just going to make note also of the way that Dennis Shawn worked with other cultures, which today is just viewed as like, oh, well, they were appropriating, without recognizing what they were attempting at that point, and that there was essentially no tradition for concert dance in this country. And they were essentially trying to, the way I look at it, that Dennis Shawn was looking to the rest of the world, in a sense, and a way of embracing that in creating some kind of tradition for dance in this country by showing audiences of that time, like, oh, here's our impression of what people are doing in Japan. Here's our impression of what people are doing in Spain. Here's our impression of what people are doing in India. And as a way of of really broadening the scope of what people would even think of as working on the concert stage. That I think is very misunderstood today, because people look at that and say, well, they were appropriating. Well, they were they were really, I think, celebrating the cultural traditions that existed throughout the world and trying to find the way for America to make its own mark, which happened, and that's what it grew out of. And I think what it but that's a way in which I think what was done literally 100 years ago versus the way something might be considered today doesn't look at it in the same way that it was looked at 100 years ago.
Right. So, but this might be a little bit esoteric, Norton, but is it in fact the legacy that's changing, or our interpretation? The Times interprets the legacy differently. The legacy remains the same.
Well, the legacy is attached to the way we interpret it.
And historians already, I mean, as Wendy was talking about, Paul Scolari's wonderful book on Ted Shawn, but that is told from a contemporary perspective. One would not have been able, I mean, sure, the history existed decades ago, but one would not have been able to talk about it with all of the ways that Paul has been able to bring his scholarship to it today. So I think it's a valid question, Alan, in terms of whether the legacy itself changes. I think the way it is viewed, or the way that people talk about it, obviously that changes.
I think the books and scholarship has a lot to do with it, and I want to go back to something I mentioned, a question you asked before about who gets remembered and who doesn't. When you look at tap dance, Bill Bojangles Robinson is remembered, partly because he made the leap from vaudeville to Hollywood movies. We have the movies to look at. There's a new book on John Bubbles. John Bubbles has very few films that he ever danced in, but we have descriptions, we have more information, and we have people who are saying that he was even more of a groundbreaking tap dancer than Bill Robinson, but he wasn't in films. So that's also a way that sort of decides who gets remembered and who doesn't.
Well, are you really saying, Wendy, that it's the size of the audience helps determine?
Well, no, I think it's access to, I mean, in that case, where you're looking at vaudeville and you're looking at early Hollywood movies, you're just not going to have as much material to make a legacy.
Right, but the Hollywood movies reached a vastly larger audience than, let's say, the vaudeville performers did. So, we know the Nicholas brothers, we know
from
Bojangles, Bill Robertson because of the film. So, so I think what also you're adding, it might not be the only factor, but the size of the audience also helps determine who's remembered.
Yeah, and the fact that Bill Robinson. Yeah, and Bill Robinson's funeral service, there were like 2 million people or something. A lot of people who. I think that's part of it.
Wow. Before we go too far, Scott Lundius also put in the comments, the partnership between Sybil Shearer and her creative partner, photographer, filmmaker Helen Balfour Morrison was extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, there are beautiful photos of Sybil Shearer because of Helen Morrison, and there are videos too. I think Sybil Shearer made a mistake by not allowing cameras to film her in performance, so that the films we have are beautiful things she's done outside or in the studio. But what she did in the kept, I don't know why. Oh, there's another center of preservation I wanted to mention is John Neumeier's building devoted to Nijinsky, where every ephemera of Nijinsky is in this thing because of John Neumeier's passion about Nijinsky. And it's sometimes it's one person who can do that. He did that. Jerome Robbins giving the money to what became the Jerome Robbins Dance Division. Sometimes one person can change a lot. Like Scott Lundius was saying, Helen Morrison made it possible for Sybil Shearer to be remembered.
Mm-hmm. But also Sybil Shearer wrote, which was, a great thing that, her memoirs in multi-volume memoir, and that is such a resource as well.
That's a great resource. And she wrote for Ballet Review, sadly now defunct. And in my list of resources, I have like 3 or 4 of these publications who are no longer publishing: Ballet Review, Contact Quarterly, and something else, where they've managed to do something digital.
Mm-hmm.
There was another question here from Artist House, Asia Zlatina. Thoughts on whether documenting legacy can serve to bring dance more into mainstream life, like sports or rock concerts, and do we want that? Dancers were once mainstream celebrities. Is that era gone?
Wait, when were dancers mainstream celebrities, or do you mean you mean in Cuba?
I don't know. I'm not sure. It wasn't my question, but I thought immediately sort of Dennis Shawn playing large stadiums kind of thing.
Yeah, and that was the popular entertainment of their day. They toured with vaudeville, they toured with the Ziegfeld Follies. That was mainstream. There wasn't TV then, or the internet certainly. So they weren't given that kind of access. But look at all the TV, all the dance that's on television now. So You Think You Can Dance and so forth. There is some, way in which that's given currency.
Yeah, that person clarified and said ballerinas like Pavlova,
Yes.
Nijinsky, even Nureyev, Fontaine. They were celebrities. They were mainstream celebrities.
Yeah, more in ballet than modern dance.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's interesting because Martha Graham wanted to not be in vaudeville. She wanted to extricate from all those Dennis Shawn gigs in vaudeville. She wanted to become art and be on the concert stage. So it's a balance.
Yes, yes. Any last words? Because believe it or not, the hour has flown by. I know. I have one last question. Where are the next generation of archivists and historians? Where are they coming from? Are they out there?
Oh, sure, they're out there. I think, they're out there in the same way, that I was as a young dancer who was really intrigued by what had come before. I see people coming through here all the time, and Wendy mentioned like tap artists, for instance, who have a great deal of regard for what came before. So it's happening in different genres. It's happening, I think, we see people here all the time, young people who are really turned on by what has happened before, and those are the people who are going to take it to the next level.
Do either of you know, are there any currently university programs that are specifically devoted towards dance archiving and historians?
I don't know of any.
Well, there certainly are dance history tracks that people go through, and then certainly my colleague here, Patsy Gay, did a master's at Florida State University, and then followed that up with a MLIS degree. So a master's in library science. So there are ways of putting together those kinds of things.
And she helped with the David Gordon archivology that I mentioned.
Indeed.
But you know what I think, Alan? I think all the kids that are like Instagramming their friends or themselves improvising in a studio, I think in a few years, some of them are going to look at all the Instagram footage they have and go, I'm going to start archiving.
That's fantastic. On that, I have to say we've run out of time, Wendy and Norton. I can't thank you enough for this really stimulating and important discussion on the topic of legacy. And I know we were joking beforehand that if it gets going, we could talk for weeks on air, but and we really could probably. I feel like we've just scratched the surface.
Indeed.
But I want to thank you both so much for taking the time, for joining us and sharing your expertise and your insight into this topic. So
thank you, Alan.
Really,
Thanks,
very,
Alan.
very grateful. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Alan. And thank you, Norton. Always love talking to you.
Yes.
Likewise, Wendy.
All right. Good night to both of you. So thank you all for tuning in tonight. If you've enjoyed this interview, please do consider donating at stepsbeyond.org. Everyone, we could really use your help so that we can continue to bring this interview series and including our performance lab. After a hiatus of over 2 years, we're resuming our performance lab live this spring on Sunday, May 15th at 7 p.m. at Steps on Broadway. That's 2121 Broadway at 74th Street. We're thrilled to be presenting new and emerging choreographers live in our studio theater to an audience eager to see the next new talents on the horizon. Choreographers and interested audience members can visit our website for full information. And again, please help us out by donating so we can continue to bring this exciting programming. Once again, thank you to Wendy and Norton, and to all of you, a good night. Thank you.